People always think that beating the odds looks like a movie scene. You know, that big dramatic victory where the hero wins the trophy? Well, when I walk onto the stage of that international competition, I'm sure that's what the audience saw. A young cellist trying to beat the other young musicians. But honestly, the other guys weren't the problem. The real war was happening inside my own head. I studied the cello at a place where the country's most talented young musicians gather. It's an environment filled with musical giants. When I hear my peers practicing in the next room, it's almost terrifying how perfect they are. Surrounded by that flawless music, I often feel so small. I used to push myself, constantly thinking, I have to survive amongst these giants. If I'm not as perfect as them, I'm nothing. I'm worthless. This kind of pressure is always with me whenever I stand on stage. It was exactly the same when I was preparing for the David Popper International Cello Competition. For months, I practiced at least 5 hours every single day, obsessing over a terrifying program. The transparent high to C major concerto, the frantic Popper tarantella, and the hardest intonations of all time, Paganini Moses variations on one string. But somewhere along the way, I lost the joy. Music stopped being art and turned into a test where I was terrified of failing. I remember specific days in the practice room where I would just break down, crying. I wasn't crying just because the technique was hard, though it was actually really brutal. I was crying because I was convinced that one bad shift, one missed note, meant I had no future. By the time I stood backstage, nervousness didn't even begin to cover it. It felt physical. My hands were shaking like a buzzing bee, which is a nightmare when you need absolute precision. My heart was racing. The world around me started to feel as if I was being looked at 1,000 different directions. When I walked out, the silence of the hall felt so heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath, just waiting for me to mess up. I sat down to play the Paganini first. It's a piece played entirely on one string, so there's nowhere to hide. For the first few minutes, I was fighting the cello. I was stiff, terrified, and just trying to survive the notes. But then, in the middle of that panic, something changed. I stopped looking at my fingers and started listening to the wood. I felt the vibration of the cello against my chest. I realized that the cello wasn't an enemy to conquer. It was just a hollow piece of wood waiting for me to breathe life into it. That was the shift. I stopped thinking about intonation and started thinking about the story I wanted to paint. I stopped fighting and I started gliding. I wasn't playing perfect notes anymore. I was telling a story. When I finished, the applause was loud. I actually won second prize. For the first few seconds, it felt like I owned the entire world. I thought, everything is going to be different now. But the weird thing is, as soon as I got in the car to go home, everything felt exactly the same. I was still tired. I still had to go to school the next day, and my cello was still just as heavy. The gold sticker on the trophy didn't change the fact that I still had to go back to the same practice room tomorrow and start all over again. The magic vanished so fast. The stage was empty. And I was just a 6th grade kid packing up my cello in the silence. And that silence was actually scary because it forced me to ask a hard question. If I only feel worthy when I have a trophy or when people are clapping, who am I when it's quiet? I realized then that basing my self-worth on a ranking is a dangerous trap. I had to learn to measure success differently. Did I grow? Did I play with heart? Did I survive the fear? I still get scared before I go on stage. My hands still shake. But beating the odds is not about not being scared. It's not about beating the person sitting in the next chair. It's about staring down in that voice and whispers in your head, you aren't enough. But still having the courage to pick up the bow and play anyway. And that is the only victory that truly lasts. And this is how that victory sounds. Thank you.